Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's webinar. We might have some late attendees. It is 5, so if there's some Pacific Coast people, they might be getting out of work. But as they roll in, we'll just continue along. My name is Adam Walter. I am the marketing director for Cheesemans Ecology Safaris. I will be moderating this webinar for Behzad and for Gina. But I'm just going to pass it off to Behzad. He's got a great presentation for you. We will be doing a Q&A at the end. If you are like me and you can't remember 5 minutes ago and you need to get the question out now, it's totally fine. Put it in the Q&A or in the chat, and I will be monitoring that and siphoning those to Behzad for the end. Gina's going to put her 2 cents in. She was fortunate enough to go on one of these trips with Behzad. Unfortunately, when the pandemic hit, but fortunately, she was able to go on the trip and speak to some of the experiences that she had. So on that note, Behzad, I'm going to pass it off to you and welcome. Thank you, sir.
Hey, Adam. Thank you. It's fantastic to be here. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen for a second so I can introduce myself properly. Hi, all. Thank you so much for coming over. My name is Behzad Larry. I'm the executive director of the High Asia Habitat Fund. I've been working with snow leopards for almost the last decade now, and it is just such a I always just love sharing and talking about snow leopards and the habitats they live in and the work that we do. So it's just such a pleasure to actually be here and share that with you. And so I'm really grateful you've given the time in your evening to do so. Oh, Gina's just joined. I'm actually sitting at a hotel in New Delhi right now. I just arrived 2 days ago, and then I'm flying in the next 3 hours actually to Leh, which is the capital of Ladakh, in the very north of India, sort of sandwiched between the Tibetan plateau on one side and the Karakoram mountain range on the other side. And in 2 days, today I'll acclimatize in Leh. It's at about 10,400 feet at altitude, so rest all day. Tomorrow, kind of take it easy. And then on the third day, I'll head to the camp we're using for our ecotourism programs, which I'll tell you a little bit more about shortly. What I'll do now is I'm just going to share my screen, this little presentation we have for you to tell you a little bit more about community-based conservation, about tourism, and about the most pressing challenges and issues we have in High Asia. So I'll just check in one sec. Adam, Gina, would you like to say anything, or should I jump right in?
Gina, go ahead. You can speak to what you experienced when you were on the trip with them prior to the pandemic.
Hi, everybody. Sorry I was late. It's a little time difference here where I'm at. Welcome. Thank you for coming. Behzad, thanks for agreeing to give us a talk about snow leopards. Behzad had invited me shortly before the pandemic, actually, to come scout one of the snow leopard trips with him. And so I ended up in Ladakh a little bit before, COVID was becoming a big deal, but, it wasn't quite called a pandemic. So we were heading out there to see the snow leopards, and, we headed out, had a couple days of acclimatization and went to Himalayan National Park to witness these snow leopards. So we knew heading into the park on our first day that the spotters had already spotted a snow leopard. And so we were really excited because, who doesn't want to see a snow leopard? But so we headed out to Himalayan National Park, got to the spot where the spotters were, and, lots of scopes set up. So we're running over to see the snow leopards, and, there's snow leopard in the scope. We're watching it. And then boom, there's a second snow leopard that shows up, and they start interacting. So everybody's like, oh my God, we're not even seeing just one, we're seeing 2 interacting. So we, watched the 2 interact, and the interaction ended up with them pair mating. So we were super, super excited. And even all the spotters and Behzad was very excited because it's a very rare event to see. So it made a really special encounter for us. And for any kind of encounter, I think if all of you've had this encounter, it always leads to more questions about what is that species ecology, how do they live, what are some of these challenges that they're facing for conservation. And this is what led me to partner up with Behzad and support him in founding the High Asia Habitat Fund and having him come speak about snow leopards tonight. So I'm really, really excited to host this with partnership with High Asia Habitat Fund. So thanks again for coming, and sorry you guys that I just came a little bit late, but take it away, Behzad. Thanks.
No, that was quite the sighting, and I remember it was a pretty close one, maybe 200 meters or so. So awesome. You could actually see them with your naked eye just on the side of the mountain. And then, so our camp is just in that same area that Gina was just talking about, and I think there's 3 cubs from that mating, Gina. But you can never tell, which snow leopard they actually belong to. So we're assuming that ties up sort of with the timeline we saw them at. All right, so I will jump right in to this presentation. Thank you again, everyone, for being here and learning a little bit more about snow leopards and conservation. So let's start off with a little bit of context. Adam, if at any point my screen kind of goes out or it's too slow, just let me know, since I'm in New Delhi at the moment. Internet might be problematic.
Will do, for sure.
To start off with, snow leopards are found across 12 countries. They basically start off in the very eastern Himalayas, and then kind of go through this whole belt of the Himalayas, go north of that into the Tibetan plateau, and then into the Karakoram range, the Hindu Kush range, the Pamirs, and then the Altai and the Tian Shan, and sort of through the Pamir Knot and into what is north of the region of Xinjiang in China, into Kyrgyzstan, and then up towards through Mongolia, and then up towards Russia and Siberia. So if you think about the range, natural range of snow leopards, it's vast. It's all sort of high altitude, in some places over 4,000 meters, which is over 12,000 feet, in some places over half that. But basically, once the tree line starts sort of ending its snow leopard territory in what is, the largest chunk of mountainous area on our planet. And so it's conserving them is actually a huge international task. There are several organizations that work on it, including us. And what we have been trying to focus on for our part of this is to not replicate what other people are already doing. We're trying to actually support other organizations with the kind of specific skill sets we have. So, which I'll get into a little bit more later, but we're basically trying to work across all 12 of these geographic regions with a primary focus currently in the very north of India. So in the Trans Himalayas, in the Karakoram, and then in Tajikistan, in the Pamirs, and then in Kyrgyzstan, in what is the Tian Shan Mountains. So just some geographical context of an area that is incredibly diverse in terms of culture, incredibly diverse in terms of ethnic groups and languages spoken, and how people view the snow leopard. So this is sort of what High Asia looks like for the most part, like steep mountains, really kind of barren looking places, almost no trees, and a lot of snow and ice at the higher elevations. It actually, and so, the most romantic mountain ranges you've heard of, when you think of the Tibetan plateau, when you think of the Pamir or the Hindu Kush or the Karakoram, you think of these journeys of exploration of faraway places of, the part of the East that was relatively unknown actually till the end of the 1800s, when Western explorers first started coming over here. Besides that, it was all just word of mouth. It was all just stories. It was never actually documented in detail, because it was just mountains, landlocked. So with all of that, it is also one of the world's, it's the world's third largest store actually of water in the form of ice, after the Arctic and the Antarctic. The world's third largest reserve of fresh water is High Asia, is the Himalayas, is all these mountains. And with climate change, all of that is at risk, and is we've been looking at glaciers receding in this region for the last 20 years, 30 years almost. So this giant chunk of the planet actually supports all of these major countries in Asia around it. Supports India, supports China, supports Russia, supports all of the stans, and supports countries downstream, because many of these deltas, like the Ganges, which is a huge Indian river, it originates in the Himalayas, but flows across all of North India and empties into the Bay of Bengal in Bangladesh. So it's supporting a vast people group. Over 3 billion people rely on meltwater from high Asia. So in terms of how critical it is to humanity, all of this region is just so important. And with global warming, with climate change, with receding glaciers, all of this area is basically at the heart of what could be really crazy time in the next 20, 30 years as water goes down, as food production drops, as more countries compete in this region for access to a shrinking stockpile of fresh water. So it's, this is the context for where the snow leopard lives. But the snow leopard is not the only iconic species in this area. It is incredibly diverse. Just the eastern Himalayas are home to over 10,000 species of plant, 900 species of birds, and over 300 species of mammals. So when you look at the whole region, if you look at all these 12 countries, if you look at this entire geographic area, it is a biodiversity treasure trove. There are still so many things in here that we've not studied. And so for us, it is not just the snow leopard that we're looking at. We're looking at high Asia. We're looking at all of these different things, all of these things that are tied into this ecosystem, into this chain, and are super important ecologically. Because, if anything in the chain is suffering, it affects the whole cycle. It affects every other thing in it, because, everything plays a certain role. So we're looking at the whole region on an ecosystem level, on a whole biodiversity chain level. And clearly though, the most iconic species is the snow leopard. When you think of, if you'd like to travel to this part of the world, what do you want to see? You're definitely, you'd be would be a rare person if you were to say it is this type of plant that I'm really looking forward to see. So it is the snow leopard. And the snow leopard is not just iconic, it is a critical linchpin in this whole system. It's called a keystone species, or also an umbrella species. And what that means is basically, if the ecosystem is doing well, the snow leopard is thriving. Or on the other hand, if the snow leopard is thriving, it signifies that the whole ecosystem is in balance, that it is working well. And when you have these sort of markers that you're looking at, when you see that one species, and just by monitoring this one species health, how it's doing, how it's able to get prey, how it's able to navigate human-wildlife conflict, you get a really good understanding of the health and dynamics of the region as a whole. And if you notice a decline in populations, if you notice that snow leopards are suffering, if you notice that maybe they aren't able to hunt enough, maybe they are coming into contact with humans a lot more than is statistically appropriate, then it signifies that there is something wrong in that ecosystem. And so they're basically a weather vane, a thermometer of some sort for all of this. So if the snow leopard thrives, high Asia is thriving. If high Asia is thriving, Asia is at peace. And if Asia is at peace, it's good for the whole world, right? So it's basically a complicated chain. And if you think of the whole world in this perspective of climate change, this perspective of a challenge that collectively all of humanity faces, the snow leopard is actually not just a keystone species, not just an umbrella species for these super remote regions in high Asia. It's actually a keystone species and an umbrella species for the whole planet. Just like how oftentimes, if you ask people to name an animal which they think is incredibly affected by climate change, they'll often say the polar bear, because of melting ice caps, because of how polar bears have sort of been this face of climate change, or pandas have been the face of extinction for the last several decades. It's for me, when I think of an animal that defines the next 30, 40, 50 years of our fight against climate change, it's actually the snow leopard. There's only maybe between 3,000 and 6,000 snow leopards left on the planet. There's over 30,000 maybe polar bears. So even if you look at it in those terms, this is this is the barometer with which we should be measuring it, which is slowly going down faster than the polar bears are. So this one's a little more dangerous metric to look at. So the snow leopard, two major threats: climate change, which I've been talking about a little bit, and human-wildlife conflict. Of course, we cause all of these problems. Got a little happy with the pressing there. So, this is one of the oldest stories we've heard. It's a timeless tale: shepherd versus snow leopard, or shepherd versus wolf. It's in so many of humanity's stories. It's always in the back of our minds if ever we're in a rural context. In North America, it's oftentimes, people are talking currently about wolves and exterminating wolves for the benefit of ranchers, or exterminating coyotes, or exterminating mountain lions, or even, shooting bears, all for essentially ensuring that livestock is safe. And this story plays out across the world. In Africa, it plays out with lions and leopards getting into bomas, into corrals, where people keep sheep, goats, cows. In North America, it's the same. It's mostly related to cattle. And South America, it's the same thing again. In Asia, this changes in tiger landscapes, this changes in leopard landscapes, and then it changes in snow leopard landscapes. And snow leopards, share their habitat with wolves, gray wolves, Tibetan wolves, with bears, Himalayan black bears, with Himalayan brown bears, with Asiatic black bears. And so there's a whole bunch of things in high Asia that will take something as easy as livestock if they have the opportunity. So human-wildlife conflict is a major cause of snow leopards getting killed. When you're looking at these regions of high Asia, and if you go back to picturing that map I just showed you, these super remote areas, which are, as you can see, from the back of this image, there's no trees. There's very little opportunity to actually do any sort of farming at scale. Your summer seasons are super short. You can grow some barley, you can grow some wheat, but not enough to last all year. So the major source of income across high Asia is actually livestock. Many of these cultures are super nomadic. Many of these cultures have grown over millennia with livestock at their source. So if you look at Mongolia, if you look at Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, all these old Silk Road trading places grew up through the centuries with livestock at the heart of it. So if you have livestock as one of the largest sources of income through the region, you essentially have grass as the key point. Pasture lands and meadows and all of these things are, again, connected to meltwater and glaciers and all of this ice basically through the summer melting, feeding these ecosystems, helping the grass grow after the snows melt, and feeding not just the domestic herds, but all of the snow leopards' prey species. So this is a blue sheep over here, nice big ram. I took this picture in Ladakh. And then again, other ungulates like the argali, which are Marco Polo sheep with these beautiful, huge curling horns, which are a type of wild sheep. Ibex, which are a wild goat with these gorgeous sweeping curved backwards horns, and urial, which is another type of sheep, kind of similar to a mouflon. And so all of these wild ungulates rely on the same grasslands, rely on the same pastures that shepherds rely on. And obviously, if there is a limited amount of grass with limited amount of resources, what ends up happening is that if you have large enough domestic herd sizes, you start pushing away the wild animals, or you have diseases that affect the wild animals that jump from domesticated animals to the wild ones, or from the wild ones to the domestic ones. And then the domestic ones travel further distances as the nomads move and give these diseases to new wild populations. So domestic herds and wild herds are competing for the same resources. But if the domestic herds if the wild herds kind of go down, snow leopards are more likely to attack domestic herds. And attacking them is oftentimes far too easy. So this is a standard corral across much of High Asia. It is literally just a little bit higher than the height of these Pashmina sheep over here. And these Pashmina sheep produce the world's finest cashmere. So when you hear the word cashmere, it itself comes from the name of one of the regions in High Asia, Kashmir. And the hair on basically comes from the chest of these goats, and it's super fine, just really nice hair, which they grow in the wintertime to just kind of stay warm, because it gets to, you know, minus 30 degrees, minus 40 degrees out here. And so at these super high elevations. And so the goats grow this hair at the start of spring, sort of in the middle of spring. They'll basically start shedding all this super fine hair. And before they, you know, go and rub up against some bush and get rid of it over there, what happens is that the shepherds kind of comb them and just collect all this hair and put it in sacks and then sell it. And it's turned into really fine sweaters and shawls and shirts and all kinds of things. So it's a super valuable commodity for people who have very little of anything else. But then when they're protected with a stone wall that is, you know, it's basically invisible to something like a leopard or a wolf that just leaps over it, it means that there is a significant amount of risk associated with protecting them. And, you know, if you're saying, well, why don't they build bigger walls, taller fences? It's because the only resource they have in this area are these rocks. And really the reason for the rock protection is not actually to keep predators out. It's actually just to keep your flock combined. So in the morning when you wake up, the entire mountainside isn't covered in these goats that you now have to go out and collect to bring them down to milk or comb or whatever it may be. So it's really just to contain them and not to protect them. Which leads to, you know, animals like this snow leopard that get into these corrals, which are entirely unsecured. So snow leopard will get in. Sometimes, you know, these are kind of walled structures that are taller, that are part of homes. This one is in a home, but it's still got a window. It's still got an egress point in it. And so this snow leopard got in. It killed over 60 of these sheep and goats. And each of these sheep and goats is worth anywhere from $100 to $200, depending on age and size and production quality. So essentially, for someone who has just lost 60 goats, you know, they have lost their entire assets. You know, imagine having a 401k and you know, you go to sleep one night, you wake up next morning and it's zero. And so now you're trying to think how you're going to pay for your kids to go to school. How are you going to pay for all the supplies you need to buy from the market? Traditionally, you do that by selling one of these animals, but now you have no animals. So it's a life-changing event that can happen overnight. The reason why the snow leopard will kill so many of these things, especially if it's stuck inside a corral, is because it's got all big cats have this predatory instinct that is natural, but when they hunt in normal circumstances, what happens is that everyone is outside. Everyone has, you know, their legs are working. So even if a snow leopard grabs one animal and successfully brings it down, the rest of the animals keep running. And so, you know, the snow leopard's then left with it, whatever it killed, it consumes it and is happy for a few days. Within a corral, they are trapped inside. And with the rest of the animals stuck in there with nowhere else to go, the snow leopard kills all of them. And by the time it's dawn, by the time the shepherd comes in to check on his flock, all the animals are dead and the snow leopard is dead tired. So this snow leopard couldn't even stand up, and you know, no one's injured it, no one's hurt it. This picture is taken just with a cell phone, just in front of its face. And the snow leopard just lying there, totally exhausted, because it's used its body as a killing machine to slaughter 60 animals. So it's just out of its, it can't even stand up. So oftentimes what will happen, where in areas where conservation programs are ineffective or weak, is that the shepherd will, you know, feel super depressed, will be very angry, and will just kill the snow leopard. Will not talk about it. If they're in an area with certain trade routes, they'll be able to just, you know, at least recover a little bit of money by selling the pelt to recoup their losses. But most of the time, they'll just bury it, not talk about it. They don't want to get in trouble with the authorities. Killing snow leopards across any of these countries is highly illegal, punishable by huge fines, imprisonment, etc. They don't want to talk about it. 360 plus snow leopards are killed annually. I think like last year it was like the estimated 370 snow leopards annually. So that's one snow leopard being killed every day in a population of maybe anywhere from 3,500 to 6,500. So it's a huge loss. What ends up happening is this is a relatively common thing. And so what ends up happening on our end is we see how we can solve this very easy to solve problem. The only thing needed to address this issue is cash. To build a corral that is actually predator proof, all you need is chain link fencing, which is in these altitudes, basically it lasts like over 100 years, 150 years. There's very little rainfall, there's very little chance of getting rust, there's almost no humidity. And so what we do with our community partners is essentially identify corrals which are super exposed, which have had predation in the past, and basically come in and with the help of the owners of the property, with other villagers in the area, with other community members, basically just create this enclosure into which snow leopards cannot get. All you need is a door and a latch. You don't even need a lock. You don't even need a padlock. You just have to close it. You know, the snow leopards are never going to get in there if it is fully sealed. What this allows us to do is essentially nip this entire cycle in the bud. If the shepherds don't lose these assets, they're fine. They're not going out of their way to kill these snow leopards. They are not going out of their way to find these pelts, to poach the snow leopards, to sell their bones or their fur, unlike the problem with tigers or with other big cats or elephants or rhinos. The snow leopard is not poached for its fur. It's only ever really killed in retaliation. And so if you modify how snow leopards and human beings interact by simply introducing a fence to the equation, it's life-changing, it's game-changing. And this lady, we built this corral, I think in January of this year in Ladakh. This lady's family, for the last, they were farmers before, but due to climate change and changing seasonality and their family size increasing, 12 years ago, they bought a herd. Maybe 11 years ago, they bought a herd and started rearing sheep and goats. And since that time, she said, they have always slept, one person from their family of 6 has always slept in the corral at night, just in case a snow leopard or wolves enter. And about 4 years ago, a snow leopard did come in, and her husband was sleeping in the corral at that time. And the corral was basically not this high, had no chain link, and you can't see it clearly, but there's actually a chain link roof that runs across the entire corral. So basically, even if it's, because this wall isn't tall enough to stop a snow leopard, but if it climbs the wall, it's actually just standing on the chain link roof, so it can't go inside. So they would sleep inside this. And once a snow leopard came in, and he was too scared to actually call out and to kind of chase the snow leopard away. So he saw over, 25, 30 of his animals get slaughtered. The snow leopard eventually actually just kind of left because it wasn't trapped inside. And they suffered this huge loss. She said once we built this corral, this is their first winter that they spent, all of them inside the house. No one had to go out. No one had to sleep in the cold. And no one had to worry about what would happen overnight. So not only is it a huge burden off the snow leopard because it cannot get into trouble, but it's also a huge burden off a family. Imagine having to sleep outside in a corral every single night. I would dread that every single day if I was like, oh man, is it Tuesday again? Is it my turn? Do I have to go outside and sleep in that? And to know that even if a snow leopard does show up, you might not want to call attention to yourself. Even though snow leopards really don't attack humans, there are no recorded cases of snow leopards hunting humans or attacking them, unless they're, you're in their face and they're severely injured or something. Even then, they're not a very large cat. So with all these things considered, it makes complete sense to go out there and to build these corrals. And our team does exactly that. Is some of our team members upgrading a corral. So the community members basically heightened the existing corral that was already here. They supplied some of the wood. We essentially made a whole roof for it, put chain link on top of it, brought the chain link in by truck, and then eventually when the trucks no longer can climb, by horse that our community partners provided, and then covered it up. And that's it. You put a door on, you put a roof on. One of these major problems is solved. And an average corral just costs $600. It protects, over in some cases $10,000 worth of assets, and more crucially, it protects a snow leopard's life, which you can't even quantify. If you go back to what I was talking about, it being an umbrella species, it kind of being, there's only 3,500, 6,500 of these animals across these 12 nations. And they are the weather vane for what is right in this region, or what is wrong in this region. And to protect them is $600 per corral. It's a minuscule amount of investment to ensure an ecosystem stays in balance. They are highly effective. This is an actual snow leopard, an actual fence, and an actual cow that I've seen. And the cow walked away from it. This fence was it's not a corral fence. It's a fence to keep wild sheep out of a barley plot. But the snow leopard basically saw the cow, stalked it. One of the villagers, this was several hundred meters from us, once we realized what was going on, one of the villagers kind of started walking down towards the cow to retrieve it, because we didn't want the snow leopard killing the cow. Because the whole point of this is to avoid human-wildlife conflict. And so domestic animals should, as much as we can, be prevented from entering the food circuit, the food chain for these predators. So we saw the snow leopard, we saw it stalk it, we saw it coming closer and closer, and we were just, no one knew what would happen. And eventually the snow leopard came over close to the fence and just sat down at the fence. And it didn't realize that the fence actually ended another maybe 300 feet later. The fence kind of just ran out because it was just for a field. And so the snow leopard could literally just kept going and come around, and it would have been face to face with the cow. But it was a mental and physical barrier. And so to see snow leopards is rare, but to see snow leopards actually come up against some of these sort of solutions, and to see the solution succeed, is just fantastic. So we get feedback all the time from communities that have full-on corrals and stuff about how they have gone out in the morning and they've seen a snow leopard sort of sitting outside the door, kind of just looking inside and being like, well, that looks nice and I'm hungry, but it can't get in. So tons of reports coming in, and of course the statistics speak for themselves. Every single community that gets it, all of a sudden depredations just drop in terms of depredations in the corral. If something does get hunted in the daytime, the rest of the sheep, of course, escape. So if you look at how limited these opportunities for livelihood are, if you look at what these sources of conflict are, we can address some of these things, but it doesn't address the fact that there's actually very little over here that can generate cash for these communities. And as long as they are reliant on these vast herds, basically we still have human-wildlife conflict, because the domestic animals are competing with the wild animals that need the same grasslands. And as long as wild animal populations are struggling to cope because of the domestic pressures, snow leopards will keep preying on these animals. So we need more wild sheep, we need more wild goats, we need more ibexes and blue sheep and argali and urial and Tibetan antelope and all these other things. That means we need to bring down these domestic livestock populations. And that means we need to be able to introduce another opportunity for these super remote communities to make cash. And that's really where tourism comes in. The snow leopard is just a mythical, legendary big cat. It's if I don't know how many of you might have read The Snow Leopard by Peter Matthiessen, or read a little bit about or supported nonprofits that worked with snow leopards before, but it's an animal that one obsesses over. Maybe I'm partial to this because I obsess over it, but it is something that really is a very emotive animal. People love to see snow leopards. The journey to a snow leopard itself is magical. All of these countries are culturally fantastic. They have millennia of rich history. So much of human history is connected to these areas, and to travel to these places to learn about the nomads of Kyrgyzstan, or the Tajik communities in Tajikistan, or the Tibetan Buddhists or the Ladakhis in these areas is huge. So the whole journey to and from these places is itself an amazing trip. When you add snow leopards to it, when you add these wildlife experiences to it, when you add the outdoors to it, when you add these landscapes to it, it's just otherworldly. It is for so many years, it's been a very, very difficult thing to do, to find how to do it, to organize trips like this, to kind of go on it as an expedition in itself. For many years, it has sort of remained as a trip that, maybe the most adventurous do. For us, creating small pockets of tourism, which could actually cater to a more standard traveler, was really important, because if only 50 people go on a snow leopard trip to a community a year, it can be life-changing. But if it's only 50 or 100 people going every year globally, that isn't enough tourism to really change how snow leopards are viewed. The whole goal of tourism is to essentially convert a snow leopard from something that is viewed as a liability by these communities to something that is considered an asset. If communities start making money by simply showing snow leopards to visitors, that income can far surpass what they are making through shepherding. In the places where we have been able to successfully introduce snow leopard tourism, what we have seen is that people will actually drastically start reducing herd sizes, because the thing is, they say, should I be outside all day taking care of 60 goats, or should I instead use the skills I've already basically created over the last few decades of having super sharp vision, of understanding what I'm looking at, of kind of seeing predators coming to my flocks, and convert that to become a snow leopard tracker instead, where you don't have to deal with the sheep and goats, you don't have to kind of trek 15 kilometers, 10 miles a day, walking around from pasture to pasture. And instead you hang out with tourists, you talk to them about your life, you find some wildlife for them to see over, a 7, 8, 9 day period, and make so much more money with substantially less effort. So eventually what we've noticed in the communities we've been working with in Tajikistan, in India, in Kyrgyzstan, is that any community that has a constant inflow of tourists over the winter period, and keeping tourism numbers low and keeping them in check, but having enough come in to generate jobs for the whole village, actually transforms how they view both the snow leopard and how they view their own livelihoods. They start looking at how they can maybe upgrade their homes to make them a little more comfortable, to host more guests, how they can work with organizations like ours to provide services, guides, trackers, cooks, chefs, helpers, porters, drivers. You start creating all these small economies where tourists coming in basically spend dollars and help these communities move away from simply livestock and simply exploiting the natural resources available, to taking one step back and actually having a more complex economy that's tied to the world without having to deal with something that causes this human wildlife conflict. So it is a hugely important thing. What we have essentially done over the last few years is we've created ranger teams that go out, they train community members, they train ranger teams in other countries to help them understand how they can transition to this model, to how they can understand how tourism can be used as a tool to essentially conserve the snow leopard and create opportunity in the community. If you do both these things, you essentially create a tourism program that is reliant on conservation succeeding for tourism to succeed. Because if there are snow leopards around, the tourism works, right? No one's going to keep coming in to an area if there are no snow leopards or none of these super charismatic goat and wild sheep species. or wolves or bears or other things. And so when you have a good conservation model, you have good tourism. When you have good tourism coming in, it feeds into the good conservation model. So it's this beautiful cycle that is created. And so we've been working now with these ground partners to essentially train them in the right way. And then when we work with our partners in the tourism space, like Cheesemans, to create tours that are basically comfortable for their clients, comfortable for you as guests, and actually give back so much in preserving these animals, in creating these opportunities, in actually helping put dollars into the place you're actually visiting, instead of having those dollars kind of just stay with a giant operator somewhere in New York or Dallas or London. That is transformative for all these places, for the guests that come, for them actually understanding and seeing where they are spending their money. So we've basically been just working on a few different experiences for the outside world to come in and see how conservation actually works on the ground, to have a few high-end experiences, super nice camps, centrally heated, and running hot water showers, that kind of stuff in places like Ladakh, to super adventurous ones where you're really out in the mountains, like this one's in Kyrgyzstan, where you're doing more adventurous stuff, actually camping, no hot showers, Central Asian long drop toilets, stuff like that. So it's a mix. It kind of replicates some of what one feels in terms of comforts on an African safari, but with higher altitudes and colder temperatures, and or goes the straight 19th century British explorer route, where you're just out here forging new trails with these ranger teams who know this terrain like the back of their hand, and the whole time you're out with them, you're seeing how they do surveys, you're seeing how they run anti-poaching operations, how they engage with communities, how they check in on what's going on, and at the same time how everyone everywhere is tracking snow leopards to show you. So it's just this beautiful way of actually going out there and not just being in a safari vehicle with someone just being like, here's a lion, here's a zebra, which is great, but it is far removed from the experience of doing that in the wild, right? And unlike walking on foot with lions or tigers or something, there is no risk with walking on foot with snow leopards, because they try their hardest to kind of just stay away from you. The fun part of all of this is that it is actually doable. I have seen at this point, I think over 130 snow leopards over the last 5 years. I see a snow leopard, every 5 or 6 day chunk that I'm outside, I will statistically see at least one snow leopard. For all of our guests that have come in from around the world, statistically, if they are with us for over 6 days, they will see something. All of our guests go back seeing a snow leopard. We never know, in the future what will happen, but the statistics is nice to show as a past statistic. And we're always fingers crossed. We hope that guests will go away with something. But the journeys themselves are so magical. The communities are so friendly. The communities are so hospitable that at the end of the day, it's not necessarily about seeing the snow leopard. It is just being there and knowing that you are actually contributing directly to preserving not just the snow leopards, but a community's way of life, a community's livelihood, and directly impacting helping this community bring down their reliance on grasslands, allowing grasslands to regenerate, allowing grasslands to go back to wild species, wild sheep populations, and kind of just helping our cycle along a little bit. Because all of it comes down to dollars. You cannot say we need to stop climate change, and you cannot say, well, you can continue depleting all these natural resources and grasslands and stuff like that. There needs to be some balance, and for that balance to happen, those dollars need to be transferred to stop people from doing a certain thing they're doing. You can't just say stop it. So all these balances are just you can see how tourism kind of works, how when it's done really well, when it's done ethically, when it is created in a way where you are respecting the biological processes, where you're respecting the biodiversity, where you're respecting your own carbon footprint as well, making sure you're buying local, making sure all the tour operators are local, and overall, running through a system that is super fair and ethical. So this is something, that we focus on. We do these to kind of sum up everything I've said. We create these programs where we engage with the community. We create ranger training programs. We help upgrade skills of rangers in Central Asia. And we use all of these tools to create an experience where outsiders from around the world can come in and experience what life is like over here when you are neighbors with snow leopards in these landscapes. What it means to live here, what it means to walk amongst the greatest mountains on the planet, and to actively participate in conservation. So we're super excited about the journeys we have created in partnership with Cheesemans, and on how we have kind of put this all together to make sure the community gets the most benefit, and how we can actually put your dollars to use directly on the ground. So all of our guests coming in have the opportunity to actually go out and check out some of these corrals, have the opportunity to talk to community members who are the same people who are tracking for them and guiding for them and feeding them, and be able to actually support all of these multi-tiered initiatives in one go. So we're super excited to be able to share this with you, and to get a chance to host you over here and show you in person what this looks like. So thank you so much. I'm excited to have any questions you have for me or for Gina or Adam. But we'd love to see you out here. I'm headed up to snow leopards tomorrow. Basically the best time to see them is wintertime, because they as it gets colder in the higher reaches, as it starts snowing up top, they basically start coming down, because snow leopards actually really don't like snow. They don't like spending time in it. They like rocks, but rock leopards doesn't sound as sexy as snow leopards. So people often ask me, it's like, you've got all these snow leopard pictures, where's all the snow? And I'm like, well, would you like to, if you're trying to stay warm all the time, why would you walk in snow? The rocks heat up. It's like a nice, they're cats. They like napping in warm spaces in the sunlight. They don't like to step in snow. So you'll see them in snow sometimes. They will hunt in snow. They will use the snow to their advantage. But if they're just relaxing, they're going to go sleep on a nice rock. So it's a little sidebar. But come see this conservation in action. Please support us. Help us build these corrals. Help us train these rangers. After I'm done over here in India for a couple months, I'm headed next to Kyrgyzstan, where we're working with the UN environmental program on essentially training Kyrgyz rangers to start these small ecotourism initiatives and to run some anti-poaching stuff. So I'll be out there with some of our team members training them. And so we use donations to essentially build corrals, train rangers, and then work on a few reforesting initiatives. Highly appreciated at the highasiafund.org, or come actually see the stuff in action on Cheeseman's snow leopard trip. So that's it in terms of my presentation, and I'd love to hear any and all questions you have. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen.
Folks, we didn't have a lot of questions come in during the talk, but if you guys have any right now, you can press the raise your hand button at the bottom of your screen. Carolyn Straub asked if we have. Do
you have a YouTube channel with some videos? We do have some videos available on our website, highasiafund.org. You can check those out. I think we use Vimeo and not YouTube for just integration with our website. But there's a few videos up there that you can definitely check out.
I'm going to post the links, folks, for both their website and our two trips that we have running in the chat, so you guys can just quick link to those. Anyone else have any other questions? Gina, do you have anything you need to add?
No, nothing to add here. I just am so inspired by all the work that Behzad is doing, and I hope that, yeah, if you don't join us on a snow leopard trip, that you'll help fund High Asia Habitat Fund and all the initiatives that they're doing to help preserve them.
It's one of the most common questions we get is, this sounds great, but it sounds too difficult. Is this something I can do? Because when we're talking about High Asia, we're talking about these mountains, and people often assume there's an element of mountaineering involved or some general level of difficulty, but there isn't. It's most of our trips, like the Cheesemans trip in particular, is in Ladakh. In the very north of India, Leh has a lot of really nice hotels. It's connected by air from New Delhi, and so you kind of fly in from the US to New Delhi, from New Delhi to Leh. In Leh, you acclimatize for a couple of days. You drive out to where one of the camps is, and you stay at this camp. And the camp is, centrally heated. It's got beds, nice linens, beautiful rugs from the region, really nice dining. There's 2 chefs at the property, a super nice kind of dining space that is, built with stone and wood and looks out over the mountains. And you kind of just do these gentle hikes through the day. There's 4x4s that kind of drop you off in various places with a spotting and tracking team, and they have these giant Swarovski scopes that they use to kind of track the snow leopards, and you kind of just walk about with them, or walk about a little bit, get back in the car, drive to a different point, walk about a little bit. So it's actually really doable. It is high altitude, and so the acclimatization days are important, but they're built in, and it is surprisingly doable. And so we've got guests that are on average, actually most of our guests are maybe 50 plus, and then I'd say actually over 60% of our guests are 50 plus. Many of them are retired, many of them are really well-traveled. A lot of our guests have already been to Africa several times, have been to India a few times, have been on maybe tiger safaris. And, they've always thought that the snow leopard was not doable until they read about something like this. And they're like, wow, this is actually within reach. Maybe I can see a snow leopard. And so a lot of people are actually really surprised of how doable it is. And then they'll go back and they'll tell their friends. And then, more people will learn that it is in fact possible to see a snow leopard in the wild. So it's just a fun thing to be able to be out there and see it. And like when Gina, you were mentioning in the beginning your own, saying that I could picture the whole thing. I was it just is something that you do not forget, regardless of how many snow leopards you've seen. Each of our trackers can, if you show them a picture, they will be able to tell you when it was taken, what the event was, how it was. And so it's just these indelible memories that are created, and it's just fantastic.
Behzad, Georgia asked what kind of lens would be needed for photographing some of the snow leopards? So
I have a 600 millimeter that I use for snow leopards. Many of our guests will bring 800 millimeters as well. We basically recommend the longest lens possible. Many of our guests will actually not own a lens this big because it's not needed for a lot of other wildlife, like safaris in Africa and stuff. So they will oftentimes rent and bring the lens with, and then kind of give it back at the end of it. But we recommend at least 600, and oftentimes 600 plus a teleconverter, or 800 plus a teleconverter. Another question from Ashley. Hi, Behzad, thank you for your talk. Promoting sustainable ecotourism and snow leopard conservation with local herders, particularly building predator-proof corrals. Are you collaborating with Snow Leopard Conservancy India Trust and the Himalayan Homestay Program? So we work with the Snow Leopard Trust itself. And they are actually our partner in Kyrgyzstan. We are working with the Snow Leopard Trust and the UN to train rangers. We've worked with the Snow Leopard Trust over the last several years, taking our ranger teams from the very north of India to Kyrgyzstan, and are working with a few other organizations as well. The homestay programs, we are not working on homestay programs in Ladakh. where the Himalayan homestay program is, because the homestay program is very well developed. So just taking our donations and putting them into an already well-functioning project didn't seem like the best use of donor funds. So instead, what we're doing is looking at these homestay programs and what has worked on them and what hasn't worked with them over the last almost 2 decades now, and replicating that in Central Asia. Because one of the things we're really trying to work on is trying to lower the footfall of snow leopard tourists coming to North India, and instead redirect some of that increasing traffic to other parts of Central Asia, which really need the dollar. So we really want guests to kind of not just view Ladakh as the place to come, but also look at Tajikistan, also look at Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Mongolia as destinations, because all of these communities need the dollars. And now Ladakh is at this spot where it is easy to sell a trip to Ladakh because of the facilities available, because of the years of work and the great tracking teams. And so we're helping these other parts of snow leopard landscape basically get more tourism by actually taking our tracking teams and flying them to these places to actually run tours in collaboration with local teams, so that there's a huge transfer of knowledge during the trip as well. So the guests get a highly experienced team, the local team gets a highly experienced team, and both sides benefit. Eventually, once the local teams are trained really well, we'll basically stop sending our Ladakhi teams out and keep them in Ladakh. But till these other teams are up to that level, that's the model we're currently working on. So it's basically we're looking at and working within both of these frameworks. And so sorry, you mentioned the Snow Leopard Conservancy India Trust. We work with the Snow Leopard Trust, which are 2 different nonprofits. I just noticed the conservancy in there. But the homestay models are universal. It's really, really fantastic program.
Does anybody else have any questions?
Most welcome.
All right. If nobody else has any questions, we can wrap up the webinar. Gina, thank you so much. Behzad, can't thank you enough. Obviously,
my pleasure.
What you guys are doing goes to a great cause. We'd love to have people come out and contribute to help the locals as well as the snow leopards. If anybody has any questions, you can obviously reach out to the Behzad directly through their website, or Gina and myself directly through our website. In the meantime, we are recording this webinar, so you can share it. It will be up on YouTube this week. Check our social Instagram and our Facebook for those links as well. But if nobody else has any more questions, we hope you guys had a good night. We thank you so much for your time. You guys have been fantastic. Behzad, you're a rock star, and hopefully we can do one of these again soon.
Absolutely. It was a thank you guys so much for spending the time to listen to me talk about something I love, and great being here.